What are the best investments? This is a question that you're going to come to when you're getting into this investing journey. And we decided to put together a tier list with a handful of investments that you might be looking at: gold, Bitcoin, crypto, real estate, S&P, Mag 7. These are just, yeah, some of the options out there. Of course, some are and all of them are going to be varying in their returns, their accessibility, and everything. So we're going to debate. I don't think we all agree on this, so we're going to kind of have to share our viewpoints. And yeah, where do you guys want to start? On what asset should we start on?
Let's start with housing. We have housing. Just the first one there.
Yeah. So yeah, so if you're owning a house and you're renting it out, it's almost like a small business at that point, and you're able to get cheap debt. So there are some benefits. It's definitely not trash.
Yeah.
Um, I don't
There's a
know.
lot
It's
of work involved, though. You have to do
yeah,
a lot of work to have real. It's like you said, it's a business, right? You have to do a lot of work to maintain properties. So I wouldn't say it's S. I wouldn't say it's at the top. I wouldn't say
no,
it's trash.
it's
Yeah,
definitely
somewhere
somewhere
between.
in between. I would maybe
That's what
put
I
it
would
as a
say.
B.
I would put it as a B because it's been around for a long time. It has the utility. People will always need real estate.
Its track record has it's performed very well as well.
Yes.
Like housing has gone up, basically in line with increased money supply, so the
Yeah.
debasement of currency. But because you're able to get really cheap financing or really cheap leverage on it, you've outperformed by
Yeah.
having housing in the vast majority of the world. And there's some, housing is very variable as well. There's some housing that has done really well, some that has done a little bit more poorly. So it's a hard thing to quantify, but I think for this, B tier sounds good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. I think the one of the main drawbacks to it, and kind of throughout the discussion here, we're going to be talking about a couple key concepts. I think one would be, do you actually own the asset? Can you take full ownership of that asset? The risks involved with it, how liquid is it? In terms of those, I think that housing actually, I would see it sliding down a little bit, but I think either one of those tiers for me would be fine. It does require
Yeah.
more capital too. That's what a lot of people have to factor in, is not everybody has enough money for a down payment in a house or on a rental property. You have to pay a little bit higher of a down payment to get that. So with some of these other things like Apple shares, Bitcoin, you can take $20 and you can store your value in that. So I think that's a fair starting place for it for real estate.
I
Yeah.
think we should also consider the fact that you can increase the supply,
True. Scarcity.
right? I think that could actually bring it down to C.
I mean, both those arguments have convinced me as well. I mean, and you could also probably lump in maybe REITs in this, which would be a
Yes.
way to get access to the rental market without needing a huge amount of capital, startup capital. But REITs have underperformed basically even the S&P 500 throughout time because of all the expenses that go into it and the inefficiencies compared to potentially owning it yourself. But again, it becomes a business at that point. So yeah, again, very complex. There's probably needs to be a B minus or a C plus to really more accurately do this one, I would say.
Yeah. I would say the next one, let's go with the S&P 500 because that's the one that
Yeah.
most people talk about. What do you guys
So
think
where
of
do you
that?
guys think? Yeah. Yeah, each of you, what do you think? Which tier?
I
I
would say
think
it's
it
a
would be,
better. Oh no, go ahead. Go
sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's right in line with real estate. I think it has properties that real estate also have in terms of the store of value aspect. I think it's better than real estate in the sense that you can fractionalize, you can buy smaller amounts of it. It's a lot less work. You don't have tenants involved. It doesn't really matter so much about your local area. It's less of a factor to it. More holders of it, more demand for it, I think, overall, than commercial real estate or rental properties into the future. So I would say that it's pretty much right in line with real estate in my eyes.
I would say it's actually higher than real estate. Maybe I'm wrong here, but let me give you my reasoning. So the reason why I think that is because more people can access the S&P 500 than housing. Every house is different. Every house has, I guess you could say, entropy. So the number of people who want to buy each individual house can be different, right? They're not all the same. And on the other hand, with the S&P 500, whether you have VOO, you have SPY, you have other funds, whichever ones there are, anybody can access them, and they're all getting the exact same thing. So there's less due diligence involved. I think that's key. And then there's also less work involved because you don't have to put into self custody. You don't have to take the risks of having a tenant who can ruin the property. But of course, there are other things that could bring it down, where you have executive risk, right? You have country risk, you have regulation risk, you have the risk of your brokerage not giving you your stocks. So maybe it comes down to C. Maybe it would be the same as real estate.
Yeah, I think again, this is a maybe an in-betweener. It's very comparable. Again, if you were able to get as cheap of financing as you do for your house, and then you leveraged up the S&P, I mean, historically, it's done fairly well, stayed consistently up and to the right, and had the diversification within it to weather storms pretty well, or crashes or whatever. So yeah, it's performed well, but again, just in line with everything else. And yeah, a lot less work than owning real estate. Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I think it's somewhere here as well. But again, 490 of those companies are basically dogs that weigh that index down in my view.
True.
Yeah.
Let's kick out of some easy ones here. Let's get some trash.
Okay. Certificate of deposit. What do you guys think? That's a GIC basically in Canada. That's a bank bond, or just a interest yielding instrument from banks primarily.
Yeah, I don't think there's much there. I mean, it's a little bit more, I would put it above trash, because the reason I say is because it's very easy to access for the most part. It's good for, people who aren't as familiar with some other options. I think it's good just to keep there. You get a little bit of interest, and anytime something comes up in terms of an emergency, you could tap into that. So I wouldn't say it's trash, but it's definitely below the other two there. So
yeah. And you get the stability of it. Let's say, for example, if you own a CD, you could sell it for the face value, but the face value is going to decrease. On the other hand, with real estate and stocks, I think this is what gives CDs a benefit if you need cash in the short term. With real estate and stocks, the value could go down in the short term, and if you need to sell, you may not get what you put in.
Yeah.
With CDs, you're guaranteed to get what you put in, but of course that doesn't incorporate inflation.
And it's unlimited. There's zero scarcity there.
Yes.
And we could probably tack on, this is bonds. We didn't have a great image for it, but these are treasury bonds, or maybe corporate bonds. We could lump into that as well. I say they're personally just in line with that. Again, liquid, there's duration risk. If you have too long of a duration, you're going to have a real negative real rate of return, which could happen with CDs as well. Yeah. And I also think that personally, the ethics of treasury bonds particularly is a very negative thing. So I would actually probably lean towards trash with them personally, but that's more of an ethical than an investment side.
I think one of the other things would be if the banking system collapses, both of these would fall apart.
Yeah.
Your housing and your stocks wouldn't. Yeah. I mean, actually, your housing and stocks might, but you still have housing and stocks. These technically don't have any utility.
That's true.
I think that's
true.
I would put bonds in trash.
Yeah.
Let's do it. I'm totally down to trash them.
Especially government bonds. Like, why would you pay enough taxes to your government in the form of, a different kind of bonds, but why would you ever want to give money to especially federal bonds? Like if it's municipality where they're actually building something constructive in your area and you're helping fund that, or if it's a bond like MicroStrategy issues where you can't access Bitcoin that route, it's a little bit different. But in terms of like government bonds, like federal government bonds, I would say that those are pretty much as trashy as it gets.
Yeah.
So in that case, would you say GICs go down or CDs go down to trash as well? Because I would say government bonds are more liquid.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, let's throw them down there.
So the only reason that I was leaving the trash open there was we have this US dollars.
US dollars.
Which I think are worse than both of these, because these are both basically layers on top of the US dollar, and they at least have some sort of interest payment. Whereas if you have US dollars, I suppose they're more liquid than these. So there is an advantage in that way. You could spend these right away, whereas you'd have to cash in either of these bonds, but you have no interest, no investment beyond just appreciating potentially against other currencies would be the only potential benefit of US dollars.
Very liquid though.
Very liquid.
Yeah. I think that's
here's a proposal for you guys.
Sorry, what was that?
Here's a proposal for you. I suggest we take those three, move them up a level, and leave the trash for the cryptos. Ethereum.
That's actually what something that I was thinking about. The fact that you don't have to get permission to use your US dollars. You can actually use, like, if you have physical US dollars, you can spend them, right? With GICs and certificates of deposit, you have to get permission, just like crypto.
Yeah, the other thing with the GICs and bonds is if you held them in some sort of custodian like that, you didn't have a bearer bond, they could be frozen like they were with Russia. I mean, I know we're not, Russia, but it technically could be frozen. Whereas at least with dollars, you can physically hold them and likely find somebody to accept those. So it's there is permission within that to some degree, but maybe a less so.
Yeah.
So let's throw that one in the trash right now. So that we have the Ethereum logo here, but in our opinion, this basically stands for everything crypto that isn't Bitcoin. We think Ethereum's kind of at the top of the trash pyramid. It's the one that creates. It's the mother a-hole of all ship coins. So that's why we use their logo. But that's what we're talking here. Crypto, because it can be created out of nothing. It's really backed by nothing. It isn't as fungible as or accepted as cash would be. Lots can go wrong. You can take self-custody of it, but I mean, if you're taking self-custody of nothing, that's still nothing.
I was going to say that, yeah. And I think there's also the importance that anybody can create more of it. More of it can be issued. The rules can be changed. There's always going to be competition. I think Ethereum is probably going to have competition forever. And it's not, if you go after Ethereum, you might succeed, because if you just keep going and keep going, you might actually create a better platform than Ethereum. I don't know what the chances of that are, but if you come after something that's like if you come after real estate, how are you going to create a second real estate? How are you going to create a second S&P 500? You can create a second ETH. You can create a second currency. Like, even we have that basket of currencies at the bottom there. You can create more currencies, but you can't really create more currencies, I guess.
Well, central banks can, like nations around the world
That's
can.
true. That's a good point. And then they can change it too. Yeah.
Yeah, they can change it, and they change their monetary policy and stuff. But that again, that's just another connection to ETH and all the other cryptos that we're basking into there, is that anyone can create more cryptocurrencies, and they can pretend they compete against the other ones and take market share from each other. And it's just all this infighting from people with that know how to even access a lot of these things, which are not very accessible, not very liquid, really small market caps. 99% of it's vaporware. There might be some small utility, but who knows which one will absorb any sort of value from that utility. Like even ETH, it claimed to have all this value from smart contracts, and then everyone just moved to layer 2 on there, and it took away all of that, all of the fees people were earning, and any of the use case of ETH and all of that. So it's just it's continuing game of just nonsense, basically, where people are saying there's a use case and value, but there really isn't, and that will for a while, I think.
I think the important thing here is what we're trying to say is that these are the things that you should be. This tier list, I don't know if you guys agree, but the way that I see it, this tier list is mostly for what you should use to store your value for the long term. Yes. Ethereum might have other use cases. Let's say people say it's the decentralized internet. I don't even know what that means, but who knows? We don't know what we don't know, right? So it could be valuable. I'm not trying to offend ETH people here. I'm not trying to say, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. It could have some value, but as a store of value, I don't think anything competes with. There are other assets that are better, I guess you can say.
Exactly. Yeah, this is investments, right? Yeah, yes. Exactly. Let's throw in, I would say this is just a foreign reserves or a basket of currencies. I would also say that the vast majority of those are going to underperform as an investment compared to anything else above it, and be lumped in there with crypto.
Yes.
Ethereum might even outcompete them.
It might, yeah.
Or outperform.
Yeah, at least Ethereum's value can go up. These currencies can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's knock out a few other easy ones. Mutual funds. I'm going to say they're probably going. I would value them under the S&P, but not by much.
I would say it would be a D because the fees are higher. you don't have as much control. Like with the S&P 500, you know exactly what's going in there. There are a lot of mutual funds that are just completely random, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the fees are higher. You have to when I used to work in banking, certain ETFs, I mean, certain mutual funds, you can't even buy them on your own. You have to go through a brokerage. The brokerage will charge you fees for putting the transaction through. It's a huge hassle.
Yeah, they
So I
almost
would
seem like a
say
scam.
yes, I would say lower than the S&P 500 is key.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with
Good
that.
call. Good call.
It's the sad thing is there's so many people out there, probably many who are watching this show today, who have trusted financial advisors to kind of point them in the right direction to ensure that their wealth is being preserved. And it seems like, especially the ones that deal with mutual funds, they don't have the best interest in mind. They're focused on selling their product, not what product makes the most sense for their clients. And so that to me is just a red flag right off the hop. Even if they are performing well, I just don't love the whole scenario of like financial advisors pushing them towards their product, which they consider to be mutual funds. So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Like Dave Ramsey.
Yeah. What do you guys think about old Buffett here, retired Warren Buffett? I would put it either with the S&P or slightly above, personally. He's performed very well over history.
I would put him above.
Yeah.
I think we gotta give respect where it's due. I mean, I don't like him as a person, like the way that things that he invests in. I think he's kind of leading to the world going in a negative direction. But you have to admit that based on the fiat rules, he's killing it.
We're also talking about not where things have been before, but where things are headed towards. And I think that Berkshire Hathaway will be very consistent. It might outperform the S&P, but it's in the same kind of ballpark. Like they're not looking into the future here. They're still taking advantage of the fiat system.
Right.
They're still living in that world. I think that it is a 20th century investment, and I think that it would be right in line with the S&P in that sense. I might even put the S&P higher than it, because at least that's more of like a feedback loop in terms of like what people are at, what's actually gaining value and appreciating in that sense versus just what they think that they should hold based on that old world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. I would just say because of their ownership and their large stake in things, that they actually have a little bit more leverage than the S&P 500 does as an investing vehicle. So they're able to, use their cash reserves to buy what they see as a distressed asset or something like that. And they get these favorable deals. I think they just have, because of where they are in their influence, they just have so much ability to maneuver very successfully. But again, into the future, I mean, it's very unknown what's going to happen there. They're going to have to make some decisions that are beneficial, hopefully, for their investors. What do you guys think? Should we leave it in B or bring it to C?
Let's leave it there for now. If we change our mind later, the one thing I don't love about it, unless I'm missing something here, but I don't think like the average person could actually afford to buy a Berkshire Hathaway share anymore. Aren't they like insanely priced?
There's Berkshire B, which is accesses you to Berkshire as well, and they're much cheaper.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
And then you can buy fractional shares too.
You could, but there's no reason to buy Berkshire A over Berkshire B, I don't believe. Life insurance. This was one that we debated before even putting this on or not, but people do actually think of life insurance as a type of investment, $80, $100 a month or whatever it is. It'll pay off basically when they die. What do you guys think? Where does life insurance go?
I would put it with not trash, because a lot of mortgages, a lot of lenders require some sort of life insurance still. Not all of them do, but the majority of them do. So I don't think it's like, I wouldn't put my money there if I had like $10,000 fall into my life, but it is still, in my mind, better than fiat or, the basket of global currencies and Ethereum as well. So that's kind of where I would put it.
Okay.
I don't think it's an investment at all. I think people see it as an investment, and I was actually the one who suggested that we put it in the list, and then everybody, I guess we all agreed to it. But I would say it's not even an investment at all, because it's a way to transfer risk. It's not a way to take risk. Investments are supposed to be a way to take risk, right? Like, let's say if you buy the S&P 500, you're taking risk by investing in a company. You're buying a part of that company, and then you're taking a share of their profits or their losses. With insurance, you're not taking risk, you're transferring it to someone else. So if you pass away, your family is secured. That risk is being transferred from you, from your family, to the insurance company. So I would say it's trash because it's not an investment. I would say if you were to put, let's say you had $100 a month that you could put into insurance, if that's your policy. If you were to put that money into the S&P 500, you'd be better off. But of course, what insurance has its own place, right? I'm not saying insurance is bad in general. I'm saying in this case, as an investment, it's trash because let's say if you don't have any, or let's say some people use insurance in ways that they're putting more money into it than they should, because they expect that it'll pay out in the future, or they'll be able to borrow money against it in the future. But again, you don't know if that's going to happen. What if the rules change? What if the policies change? What if regulations change? That's not always going to be the case. I think insurance is great as a way to transfer risk for your family to someone else. Like, you're transferring it to the insurance company, they're managing it for you, but it's not an investment.
Okay, I'm good with that. I mean,
What do you guys think of that?
the other thing too is like the life insurance salesmen are not. I don't think they have people's best interests. It's just like a sleazy kind of industry in my mind. It's I don't know. The whole thing just doesn't really sit right with me. I get that there's a place for it. I 100% agree with every word you said, Rajat. So I'm fine with it being in the trash. It's not a store of value.
Yeah. All right, carrying on, we have a few different assets here. A lot of Mag 7 stuff, which maybe we'll start with the big boss here, Microsoft, which has performed super well, been at the top of the Mag 7 for a long time now. Very dominant moat, very easy lending, very close to the money printer. Every single business in the world basically is forced to use some Microsoft product. In my opinion, this goes A tier. What do you guys think? A tier or B tier? Or where?
I would say it's B.
Really?
I would say so. Sorry, you were about to say something, Jor?
I want to read you guys this before we go any further, because we're kind of at the top now where we think we're going to be putting like 1, 2, and 3 here. And I think it's important to kind of look at the last little bit of performance here. And this is actually from MicroStrategy's recent earnings report. So since their strategy adopted Bitcoin back in August 2020, this is the performance of kind of some of these main tier assets here that we're talking about. So Amazon in the last almost 5 years has only gone up 20%, which doesn't sound bad, but when I say some of these next ones, you're going to be like, okay, what's going on? The next best performance from there is gold at 62%. Wow. So Amazon has significantly underperformed gold in the last 5 years. The next one here, Bitcoin, 692%. So Amazon, 19%, Bitcoin, 692%. NVIDIA is the next one, 874% in the last 5 years. And since Strategy adopted Bitcoin back in August 2020, they're 2,887% up.
Wow.
Crazy.
Like, that's a massive spread between Strategy and Amazon, 19% to 2,800% in the last 5 years since Strategy adopted Bitcoin. What's that?
What about Microsoft?
I didn't have them on there. I didn't think they were relevant. They're probably somewhere between, I would say probably around 100%-ish. That'd be my guess. I could find that info quickly, but my kind of opinion on all of these, whether it's Microsoft, Tesla, Apple, Amazon, NVIDIA, they're all just tech companies who basically have forced buyers because they have that capture, the market captured. None of them have Bitcoin. They all kind of are just all based on expectations of the future. All their PE ratios are insanely high, which means that it'll take a very long time to get any sort of return back on that into the future. And I kind of view them all through the same lens. They all have their risks. They all have their downsides in terms of you can't actually own them. So to me, I don't know if you guys disagree with this, but I put them all in the same category here.
I think you summarized that perfectly. I agree with you.
I would say one other thing that I would add is the tier below them has the S&P 500. These 5 companies we put in here are huge, massive majority in a market weighted index of the S&P 500. And the S&P 500 has a huge amount of passive flows into it. And a lot of that leads into people buying these shares.
Yeah.
And like there's jokes made like Apple can get back to do it, like after something happens with Apple, it's like, oh, Apple can get back to their main business model, which is buying back shares. Like that's what they're good at, right? They just buy back shares. All these companies do that. And I think it works for them, right? It works for them. They all perform fairly well. You read off those stats, and yeah, MSTR and gold and all these things have outperformed a lot of it, but they've done very well compared to all of the other companies in the S&P 500, and they should be acknowledged for that. But into the future, they're really going to have to recognize and realize, like, what is our actual value? How do we proceed from here? Is share buybacks really the best use of our money? Is there something else we could invest in that would grow our business? And I think NVIDIA really is maybe a little bit of an outlier, but amongst these bunch, because of its outperformance and because of it being so integral in something that could potentially lead to a future outperformance, which is AI and being the premier sort of chip manufacturer. I know all these companies have some sort of foothold in AI as well, but NVIDIA is the one that's been rewarded for it so far. But in my eyes, all these companies do have a lot of potential because of everything that we've talked about. But I wouldn't hold them over other assets that we'll get onto here with the next ones.
So Forrest, would you say that NVIDIA should go to A? Because it has a higher return, it has a higher potential, at least in my opinion, it has a higher potential.
I actually don't think so, because I think a lot of that potential has already been seen, and we're thinking of an investment into the future. That doesn't mean that NVIDIA couldn't continue going higher, and I assume that it will, but I think a lot of it has already been actualized.
And the PE is just crazy, no?
Their PE is high. It's 35.
35.
And the other, which means basically if you bought one share, it would take 35 years based on their current earnings to get 100% of that investment back, which is insane.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is, you said it, Forrest, they have, I think, 85 to 90% of the market share right now. There's no room to grow there in terms of like, they're not going to be able to capture more market share. They pretty much peaked in my eyes, and they have supply chain risks with the chips. I think with the U.S. trade wars going on, I think the U.S. is actually going to start manufacturing chips in the U.S. So I think that it has peaked. If anything, I would actually put Tesla ahead of NVIDIA there, because A, they do have Bitcoin, and B, I think that they're preparing themselves for the future. But I think they're fine there.
So I think the argument with that would be that they do have 80% of the market share. Where do they can't, it'd be hard for them to get more market share. In fact, they might get less market share, but maybe that market grows. Yeah. But the argument to that is maybe it doesn't, because these AIs are being able to be run on smaller amounts of chips and become more efficient. And, maybe we have seen peak. I mean, exactly with this kind of stuff, it's all these variables, and it ends up being a lot more risky than I think people realize. They just think, well, NVIDIA is the top, and it's got this moat with its fabrication and its infrastructure and everything. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of people that want to eat those margins that NVIDIA has. So there's a lot of risk, in my opinion.
Yeah. So would you guys say Tesla should move up?
Yeah.
What's that, Rajat?
So do you guys think that Tesla should move up or stay within the rest?
I think Tesla is a very risky bet. I think there's a lot of people that are saying it's not a car company, it's an AI company, it's a robotics company, it's a robotaxi company. If all of that plays out perfectly into the T, then yes, it's an A tier company on this tier. If none of it plays out, it's a C or D tier, right? So with that, I think it should go somewhere in the middle. Personally,
yeah, that's a really good way to say it.
Yeah. Actually, I wouldn't say it goes to a D tier, but maybe a C tier.
C. Yeah. All right, next one.
Yeah, next one. Let's talk about the metals before we get on to MSTR and Bitcoin. We got gold here and we got silver. I'm just going to put them in A for now, and let's figure out what we think about these two monetary type metals to some degree.
I like them because they're bearer assets. You can take them in self-custody and nobody can take them from you. The other thing is, though, that you can take them in self-custody. They're bearer assets. But let's say if you want to cross a border with them, how are you going to take them across? You can't. You have a bearer asset, but if you can't own that bearer asset in other countries, then what's the point of it?
And if you own the gold, you have custody of that gold until somebody more powerful than you comes along and
Yes.
takes it from you.
Yeah. If they can see it, they can take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which-
So what my
which
thought on
isn't
these-
necessarily a risk for most people, like in these current times, but historically that has been a risk of government
Yeah.
confiscation, of war, of things like that, of having to cross borders, having to leave your house. So that is kind of what brings it down for me, is that it's an asset that you can actually hold. It is scarce as we know it, although we've seen in the last couple of weeks, I think there was Argentina, they found like 88 million ounces of gold, just stumbled across it. And as technology improves, I think it's going to be more and more evident that it is less scarce than we believe. But I do love the fact that it has held its ground throughout time. You can take custody of it, but there's definitely holes in it, especially in the high-tech world that we're moving into. You can't really send gold across the world in a couple seconds.
No, you can't.
No. And
I think there's also the fact that you can find stores of gold. Like there was an article where it said a farmer found like $4 billion worth of gold, and he
I saw that.
Have you guys seen that? He got confiscated,
And the government took it.
So while gold is scarce today, we have no idea what the actual supply is. I think that uncertainty stops it from being an S tier asset.
I agree. I think another, just comparing these two, silver used to trade at like a 15 time, or gold used to trade at a 15 times of silver, like back in the day, as when there was, we had a bimetallic monetary system of people actually transacting with gold and silver. But what happened was we got on a gold standard based in large part because of the paperization of gold, and therefore we could trade paper notes that were redeemable in gold instead of using silver. So what happened after that was it was demonetized, and gold started to trade at like a 50 times or whatever, much higher than its relative silver value. So silver turned into what is commonly known as an industrial metal because it conducts electricity really well. It can be used in industrial applications. Actually, it conducts electricity better than gold. However, it tarnishes. So gold, in one way, it doesn't tarnish, it doesn't degrade, it stays atomically pure, which is an advantage in some industrial use cases opposed to silver, even though it doesn't conduct electricity as well. So there's a lot of comparison to happen there within its actual use case. But one thing should be considered is silver has already been demonetized. And in my belief, gold is becoming demonetized, as well as all these other assets, because there is a better form of scarce sound money, which again is why we have Bitcoin below there. In my opinion, Bitcoin will eat into the value of all of these below tiers as far as investment goes. But a big part of the value capture will be coming from gold, because there's a huge monetary premium on the actual use case of gold, which is primarily jewelry and a little bit in industrials.
Yeah.
I think that from my perspective, I like actually silver as a better investment than gold. And this is kind of where I disagree with you guys. I agree with everything you said, Forrest. I think that gold is also being demonetized, which to me would then put silver and gold in kind of the same class just on that alone, the fact that they are both about to be demonetized. The other thing too for me is that if you were looking at, let's say you had $5,000 and you might say, well, gold is trading about $3,500 US today. So I could get one gold ounce and then, have a little bit of cash extra, or I could buy, I don't know, what's an ounce of silver now? 20. I think it's like 80 to 1, where you could get 80 ounces of silver for 1 ounce of gold. So
like
if we kind of agree that, what is it? Sorry?
Like $30 an ounce.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So maybe it's even higher. Maybe it's 100 to 1. Both have their flaws. I wouldn't love storing silver or gold in my house. But silver, to me, whether we're talking medicine, technology, solar panels, silver seems like it's a lot more useful. And I think from my, experience of looking into this stuff, it seems like both these assets have been very manipulated by the banking system. I think silver has been much more manipulated by the banking system for a lot of reasons that we don't need to get into today. but I just think that there's more room for, you know, I would rather hold 80 ounces of something than one if I kind of view them as the same thing. That's my end of the day kind of thought on it.
If you view them at the same thing, but they aren't, they're elementally different, atomically different. And that almost kind of sounds like a nominal bias a little bit to me.
Yeah,
that
it
might
is.
be, yeah, that might be like how somebody looks at these coins that are in, you know, in the trash section, the ETH and stuff. Oh, I can buy a lot more ETH, or I can buy a lot more XRP. It's the same thing as Bitcoin.
Right, but Bitcoin and Ethereum have much different characteristics. I get the elemental part of it, kind of, but the way I see it in terms of a store of value and a reason to hold on to something like that, their properties, to me, gold and silver are very similar in that sense. And so if I see them the same, I don't see Bitcoin and Ethereum the same. So I get what you're saying in that unit bias. But in this sense, I personally view them as very similar. So I would rather have 80 of them, because I think that in a world where everything breaks free, silver could actually go higher than gold. I think gold's pretty much peaked.
Yes. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And that's what comes back to the idea that gold has, like, if silver's already been demonetized, and if gold is becoming demonetized, then it can only go down in relative value compared to something that already has been demonetized. And the use case of gold is they're not one-to-one. They are different. Again, you know, jewelry and stuff, it's easier to make it with gold, and, you know, has all that different value. And it technically is more storable throughout time because it doesn't corrode. It doesn't break down like silver does.
True.
So there's a technical aspect of that as well. But again, if it's been demonetized, largely demonetized, then that isn't really a variable of its worth as much. It's really just, hey, does this work in this application better? Is this utility, like, is gold better in this electronic device than silver, or is silver better? That becomes the discussion. And in that case, silver will oftentimes win out. So yeah, I think silver potentially, over the really long period of investing, silver could be more stable and therefore grow with monetary debasement, rather than gold, which will begin to fluctuate and actually go down relative to silver. So that's my thought between those two.
So would you say there should be kind of in the same spot then?
Probably in the same, but I would maybe, I don't know. Yeah, in the same. I don't know if they deserve to be an A or B, though.
I think they deserve to be A, because you can take self-custody, and they're really hard to create more of. With everything in B, you can create more. You can create more shares of Tesla. You can create more shares of Apple. But you can't really just produce more silver and gold out of thin air.
Very good point. Yeah, I agree with you there.
If that does happen at some point, let's say you have like lab-grown diamonds, lab-grown gold, I think gold and silver go to D, because what's the point of holding them?
You can actually create gold, but it becomes like radioactive. It's like a nuclear isotope that breaks down into gold, and it's completely unfeasible to do so with today's technology. But yeah, I looked into that because I was curious as well, because there is lab-grown diamonds, and diamonds are basically kept up at unreasonable cost for no reason.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So let's get to the main part of this one.
All right.
That everybody's been waiting for.
Start with MicroStrategy.
Yeah, MicroStrategy versus Bitcoin. I mean, where do you guys want to kick this one off?
I think MicroStrategy is A, if not B.
Ooh.
Really? Whoa.
I think
it's not B.
I think it's A because it can't. Okay, let's say why it can't be S. It can't be S because you can't take self-custody. Taking self-custody is extremely expensive. If you want to take stock certificates, then you're gonna have to pay a fee. You're gonna pay like $300 to take self-custody, right? That's one thing.
But hey, Rajat, you still also don't even own the Bitcoin. That's like, there's 2 layers to that, right?
Right. You still don't own the Bitcoin. Exactly. That's another thing. MicroStrategy can create more shares if they want to, and we've already seen that. We're seeing that right now. Right now, the strategy is working really well because they're selling their shares at a premium and they're buying Bitcoin. But at some point, how do we know that they're not going to do that when their shares aren't selling at a premium? Nobody can guarantee that.
Well, it wouldn't make sense for them to do that, but yeah.
I agree. But what if they don't? what if for whatever reason they have to pay their costs, they have to pay for their strike, their strife. The only way for them to do it is to sell more shares. I don't think they're going to do that. I'm just saying that the possibility is there. That's the key, right? If something is possible, then it could happen, right? On the other, there's also the other thing where you have to keep it with a brokerage, you have to keep it with a custodian. There's all those levels of risk. What if Michael Saylor just turns out to be an absolute psychopath, and because we don't know what his intentions are, right? What if he does some crazy things? I'm not saying he will. I'm just saying you have to consider this, right? What if he does something crazy that completely destroys the company? You're taking on a lot of risk with MicroStrategy compared to even gold and silver. I think MicroStrategy will outperform them because they have Bitcoin, but with Bitcoin, with gold and silver, you can take self-custody. With MicroStrategy, you can't.
I 100% agree. And this is what is really important to assess when you're looking at investments is the level of risks and the risks associated with any investment. Plus, you're balancing that against its potential return into the future. So right there, you said, you can take self-custody of silver and gold. So it kind of beats out MSTR on that level. But because MSTR is holding Bitcoin, and all the value of all these things is going to go towards its Bitcoin holdings, it could outperform silver and gold into the future. So you have to evaluate those risks. You can't take self-custody. You're never going to become allocated to the actual Bitcoin per share that your shares are equivalent to within MSTR's holdings, but you could outperform. You could outperform Bitcoin with MSTR. That's kind of their hope as far as what their investment guidance shows and their history as well. They have outperformed Bitcoin since putting Bitcoin on their treasury for a slew of reasons. Will that happen into the future? Who knows? Because of the risks that Rajat talked about. There's additional risks beyond that as well. So many risks. There's confiscation risk from government. There's risk of competition, although they do seem to have a moat to some degree, but there is, they are in the financial sector of equity securities. So yeah, there is additional competition risk. And again, investments are evaluating risk versus return or risk versus reward. And so, yeah, but I think it's well-deserved at an A tier in my opinion, but it definitely does not crack into the S tier because of the custodian risk.
Yes. I agree with everything you guys said. I think the last thing I would say, kind of given, aside from strategy being the best performing asset in the last 5 years, it is also very easy for people to get. And Bitcoin, if you have a lot of capital to allocate, it's not something that we advise trying to do right off the hop. Strategy seems like a really good placeholder for self-custody Bitcoin. But I think the three of us agree that Bitcoin is the asset that everybody wants. It is the S tier asset. And I think it's pretty fitting that we finish this video at 42 minutes based on Saylor's $42 billion worth of Bitcoin. And so this was awesome, boys. Thanks everybody do you guys have final words or should we wrap it up?
I think we should talk maybe about why Bitcoin deserves to be at an S tier.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to have it 42 minutes for us, but I guess 42. We can.
Okay. That 42 was nice, but I think we deserve, people are going to, if people aren't Bitcoiners and they're looking at this, they're thinking, what the hell is going on here? Why is that an S tier?
Why is the S&P 500 not S tier and Bitcoin is?
Exactly. So yeah, in my opinion, Bitcoin is something you can take self-custody of. It's demonetizing gold. It's demonetizing real estate. It is becoming the base layer money. It is an alternate network that can be used all around the world. Its use cases are that you can use it without permission. You can run your own node. You can verify that you hold it. You can send it to somebody without asking permission. There's no capital controls on it. The use case for remittances is huge right now with Bitcoin, in my opinion. And it has a 21 million cap. It has never gone down. Basically, it's very secure as far as a network goes. What else do you guys have to add to that?
It can't be confiscated. It can't be censored. You don't have to get permission. You can take self-custody. Nobody can stop you from using it. It's not physical, so you don't have to worry about having to put it. You don't have to worry about it being confiscated from you. Let's say if you want to cross borders, like with gold, for example, if you can have a bunch of gold, you can take self-custody of it, but how are you going to leave your country with it? You can't. It's impossible. with Bitcoin, you can just memorize the seed phrase if you want to. You can take your physical wallet with you. You could write it on a piece of paper. There are so many options there. But then I think what makes it so powerful is that you have the option to take self-custody if you want to. But if you don't want to take self-custody, then you don't have to. With all these other assets, pretty much everything else, other than gold and silver, I guess, with everything else, you have to rely on somebody else. Even with dollars, you could take self-custody of dollars, but if your government wants to, if the US government wants to borrow more, if the Federal Reserve prints more, you're at their mercy.
Yeah.
With Bitcoin, that's not the case. No matter what happens, there's always that finite supply. If you have one Bitcoin out of 21 million, you always have one out of 21 million. You're the only one who can change that. Nobody else can change it. Nobody can change the denominator, meaning that you have the power over your wealth, and Bitcoin is the only one that gives you that.
Yeah, and I would say we're also looking at this as an investment. So the returns of Bitcoin have been insane, just
Yes.
absolutely insane. The track record of returns is longer than MSTR. But as far as when MSTR bought Bitcoin, they've outperformed Bitcoin, but Bitcoin has a longer track record than that. Yeah, it's just the protocol moat as well. Like you might be thinking, oh, what about these other cryptos and stuff? The moat that has been created around Bitcoin is much stronger than if it was a tech company. It is actually a protocol that is being built on and used, and it's next to impossible to break through once a protocol has been established, which Bitcoin has been for a monetary protocol.
Yeah, and I think that if you're watching this video and you're like, what the hell are these guys talking about? Bitcoin at the top. I think that the only people who wouldn't put Bitcoin at the top of this list are the people who haven't taken the time to learn about what Bitcoin is. And people like to think of it as store of value. They think of it as a monetary network. It is both. It is everything. It is the future of finance. It is the future of everything. And, you know, barring any black swan, unpredictable events, just like Jeff Booth says, as long as this asset remains decentralized and it remains secure, nothing's going to outperform it. Everything is actually just going to be repriced by Bitcoin. So the fact that you can take self-custody is the only asset that you can truly own. We talked about gold. You own it until somebody more powerful comes along and takes it. You can't do that with Bitcoin. If you do it properly, if you understand it and you secure it properly, no matter how powerful that army is, they cannot take your Bitcoin. And in the current environment that we're in right now, that's a pretty big deal. So that's about 5 minutes of why we put Bitcoin at the top. If you want more information, this is what our whole channel is about. We want to explain and talk about Bitcoin to the average person because we think it is so powerful and important for the future. So great video, boys. Anything else? Can I wrap it up this time?
What's
QR
right?
code.
QR code, right. This channel here, we do not take any ads. We do not have any sponsors. So we are 100% community funded. Big shout out to those who have been supporting the show here and the channel. We do a live stream every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And yes, if you want to send some sats our way, we would very much appreciate it. So thanks, fellas. This will go down as one of our best, I think, and timeless. Hopefully we end up being fairly accurate, but anyways, thanks, boys. Catch you on the next one.